Ghost of YOTEI drowns you in options, things to do, and awesome upgrades to get. And while it's easier than ever to get lost in its vastness, you'll still want to be smart about some of the decisions you'll be making along the way. Which is why today we're going to go over some of the biggest mistakes that I wished I also knew about early. Coming up to number 1, go ahead and change the following settings. Into gameplay, you can now turn on a target lock system, something we didn't have before, but now you can pretty much press up on the D-pad and this is going to let you mark your current target in view. This way you can more easily follow exactly to the target you want to hit. Also, keep in mind that you can actually have multiple loadouts now by default as you unlock more gear. This way you don't have to switch back and forth between different charms and you can pretty much have them dedicated to multiple types of builds. I recommend having multiple builds at the ready for melee, range, and also for exploration, plus maybe a fourth one in case you want to test out shenanigans and other crazy ideas. Second of all, you may also want to turn on alternate control schemes. In this case, it's going to change the default triangle and square attacks to R1 and R2 for the light and heavy attacks, to more closely resemble the typical action game control scheme if that's something you got used to from other games. Third of all, also turn on enemy range indicator. This is not completely needed, but if you're having trouble with enemy attacks coming from off screen, especially from archers, this may help with that, adding another indicator for you. And fourth and finally, you may also want to choose the simplified minigames control either now or a bit later, or whenever you get sick of the minigames such as bamboo strikes and want to have the button sequence a little bit easier to deal with. Moving on to number 2, a big mistake that a lot of players will likely end up making is focusing a little bit too much on the main story and not enough on the side content. Focusing purely on the main narrative means missing out on a lot of powerful upgrades, weapons, and armor that's mostly provided by side missions and other activities in the open world. So first of all, focus on some of the altars of reflection, as that's going to provide you the majority of skill points that you need to invest in Atsu's kit, from combat all the way to her defenses. Also keep in mind that you can find these in camps too, not just jumping puzzles, so in this case pay attention to the swarming butterflies that are typically spawned around these points of interest. Also, you will need to spend that point at the altar as it won't get banked in the UI. Unfortunately, you actually need to allocate it right there and then. Kinda sucks, but also try to plan ahead a little bit in that regard. Next, also focus on the bamboo strikes. While some of the minigames involving them have changed slightly, they still provide spirit, which is one of your most important resources in this game. Not just to dish out cool abilities, but also to stay alive. I would argue one whole point of spirit is at least as useful as multiple hot springs in terms of how much HP you can get out of it. Moving on to number 3, YOTEI takes away the old katana stances and instead replaces them with 4 new melee weapons, which more or less also expand further upon said stances. However, if you're like me and got used to the old placements, there's going to be a bit of adjustment needed before you can actually switch to them as on the fly and as easily as you used to do in the past. But in the meantime, let me show you which weapon is best against each situation. First of all, dual katanas are going to be best at countering enemies with spears. Unfortunately though, its placement is where the stone stance used to be rather than the wind stance, which in the past was the one in fact countering spears, so keep that in mind. Yari is our spear. This is best at countering enemies with sickles, gives us a Spartan kick, and even provides a lot more range compared to some of our other melee options, so it's almost going to combine the old stone and wind stance in terms of functionality. Kusarigama, in the meantime, is your best choice for breaking enemy shields, but it's also going to have the added advantage of providing great AoE range and a very useful assassination, Scorpion style. Luckily, its functionality and placement remains similar to that of the water stance from Tsushima. A special mention here goes to the Odachi. While technically separate from our stance wheel and best suited against brutes or other large enemies, its focus on heavy and powerful attacks actually makes it an excellent option against pretty much all types of enemies in fact. Since breaking enemy defenses is our first and most important option to perform in combat, this means we can easily reach their HP bars, their true HP bars, much easier as a result. So give it a try and maybe upgrade this in case you just want to go with one style fits them all. Moving on to number 4, always grab bounties no matter what. Bounties are an excellent source of quick coin early on, extra resources, and even unique items. A lot of the settlements around the map in fact will feature bounty boards / brokers with several targets for you to hunt down, and typically they only give out clues about the last place that bounty has been seen at. But in reality, chances are that just following the game's structure will bring you at or close to these bounty places anyway. So this way, it's going to be easier for you knowing that on your way to the next objective, you may have a bounty or two just begging to be taken off the list. Quick tip, by the way, you can also choose to spare some of these bounties in exchange for some extra cash, assuming that you want to really maximize that revenue. And on the flip side, you're also going to find bounties on Atsu as well that you can go ahead and rip out. Her depiction becomes increasingly more menacing as she takes down members of the YOTEI 6, but at the same time, this will also increase the bounty sum on her head. And while this won't stop others from hunting you down when you least expect it, at the very least, you get a quick spirit top up in case you're in need of a quick heal. Also, when you're interrogating targets to follow the clues about the YOTEI 6, you may want to focus on any current mission that actually also unlocks a new weapon for you, especially early on with KhrazeGaming and whatnot. You're going to want to actually go with those, and you will neatly see that from the menu when you interrogate set targets. This way you can reach them quicker, which is going to make the remainder of the game a lot easier following up. At number 5, by far the best and quickest way to massively increase your damage is to upgrade said weapon back at your homestead. However, now it's going to be a little bit more costly because instead of a single melee weapon, we have 5. Not including all of the other new and old options we had back in the days, including the armors and of course the bows. And early on you may struggle with this a little bit because resources are not quite as abundant. So in this case, I recommend prioritizing early on the weapons you find most useful, either for your playstyle or depending on the enemies you want to counter the most. So for example, if shielded enemies become annoying and you want to deal with them quicker, maybe it may be worth it to focus on upgrading that KhrazeGaming, or dual katanas once you unlock them, useful against spears in case you're having difficulties with speared enemies. Or later on Odachi, this can work just as well. Like I said before, this can actually be used as a great all-around option. At number 6, let's talk about a few more combat tips to make encounters a lot easier. First, invest into the perfect parry perk and disarm counter early on to deal with the normal attacks, the blue and the yellow glint ones. For the first two, try and practice perfect parries on every occasion. The slow motion, spirit regen, and amazing damage follow-up are one of the many things that make ghost combat so satisfying. If you're having trouble with that, also use the Bounty Master armor to extend the perfect parry window, but keep in mind that it's also going to disable normal parries. However, enemies also have a new type of attack, which is indicated by the yellow glint. This is going to end up completely disarming you, and you really don't want to do that because eventually you can be left off without a weapon and you will have to manually pick it off from the ground. So in this case, you can actually counter that with, you guessed it, the disarm counter we just unlocked. So if you perform a focus attack against the target by holding down and then quickly releasing the triangle right as they are performing their yellow attack, you will end up disarming them instead and gaining some extra spirit. You can even make a playstyle to throw that weapon back at the target for almost guaranteed one-shots with some of the upgrades here at the thrown weapon perk line. For red attacks, it pretty much goes just like before, up until you get the upgrades to turn them to blue. Yeah, in the meantime, just simply perform side steps or even dodge rolls, which will usually get you out of harm's way. Also, dodge rolls, if you invest in them early, they are very helpful in case you caught fire and want to extinguish those quickly. Similarly, tools are more important than ever this time around. They are amazing at a lot of things, but most important is that Atsu, unlike Jin, can use some of her tools in one-on-one duels. Jin was only able to use weapons and the legendary skills. Atsu can actually use kunais, the pocket sand, and even set her weapon ablaze against some of these targets. But especially so if you're going against targets and want some extra ways to distract them, literally the kunai may be one of the best options. It instantly takes away their defenses and even staggers them momentarily, so you can quickly chip away at their health bars without being interrupted at all. Give them all a try, they are actually very strong. This brings us to number 7, set up a camp. Seriously, this new feature comes packed with so many benefits and it would be a waste not to use them. First of all, it's also a fast travel point, so you can quick travel wherever you left your previous camp in case you, for example, find a good farming spot. Second of all, and its biggest advantage though, comes from the fact that it lets you spawn vendors to you instead of you having to travel to them. Virtually every vendor you recruit to your wolf pack can be summoned directly to your camp right here from the wolf pack menu with a simple press of a button, though they can also randomly spawn whenever you set a random camp out normally into the open world. But once at the camp, they will automatically join you, so you can do all of the buying, selling and upgrading that you want. Plus, from the menu here, you can conveniently see if there's any new items in stock or objectives that they may give you. Also, don't forget that you can now cook meals and get temporary buffs out of them. Everything from buffing your melee damage all the way to defenses and more, depending on the type of meal that you cook. Now, personally, I'm more on the aggressive side, so I always go with the fish meal prepped just for the extra melee perk, helping against targets that I want to take down quickly. While temporary, it is worth it and you can easily skip all of these animations anyway. And finally, besides this, you can also pass the time at the camp in case you prefer playing during a certain time of day. This is something that we did not have unfortunately in Tsushima, but I'm glad that we have right now. Moving on to number 8, let's talk about charms and why you don't want to just pay attention to their primary effects. Because if you pay attention to the bottom left side of the screen, you will notice that they can affect, just like some of your other gear including the armor, stuff like melee, your range, defenses, and so on. So if you're focusing on a specific build, you may want to prioritize the charms that boost that specific area of the build. So if you're focusing on, for example, melee builds, you may want to buff up, in this case, melee damage. Similarly goes to, for example, defenses and spirit generation. Furthermore, I also recommend leveling up as many charms as you can while you're still progressing in the game. Virtually every charm in the game can now be upgraded up to 3 times, gaining a more powerful version of its effect. And usually these challenges involve really simple steps, such as defeating a certain number of enemies with a certain weapon or ability while having that charm equipped. So swapping them often and trying out different loadouts is the key to your success. Speaking of dealing with enemies quicker, standoffs are a great way to achieve that and get an excellent top up on your spirit. Early on, in fact, you will start a lot of fights with low to no spirit because you simply don't have a finalized build just yet. So having a way to quickly round up the targets, fill up on that spirit, lets you pretty much spam your abilities and heals way more often following it. But just like in Tsushima, enemies will try to bait you at the start of the fight. So to avoid all of that, pay close attention to their footwork rather than their upper body, which you will want to fully ignore. So in this case, pay attention to their feet, and the moment they leave the ground, that's when you want to let go of the button and strike at them. If you further level up the standoffs, you can even take down extra targets too for even more spirits, all the way to using a pistol with some of the later on unlocks. And finally to number 10, when you feel lost, go ahead and call the cartographer Isaburo to buy out all of the maps they have available. These will typically reveal points of interest you haven't been to in areas you haven't fully yet explored, such as altars for technique points, hot springs, and other useful upgrade locations. This way you don't have to rely purely on random chance when exploring or just the guiding wind. In addition to this, your spyglass is one of the most useful new additions as well. With this, you can minimize your dependency on map menus even further, as you can scout the land of YOTEI far and wide with it. In this case, it's very useful to place any pins to your next settlement or enemy camp, all the way to identifying your next bounty you want to hunt down. And then you can have, like I said, the wind guiding you towards there without ever having to interact with any menus. Anyway, here are a few more quickfire tips that didn't belong into any category. First, you might want to end up suffering when you see enemies crawling on the ground. It may not seem important, but it's actually going to give you a full spirit point, which can be useful for a quick heal, especially early on. Also, constantly be on the lookout for the white flower fields. More or less, they will provide a speed boost when you're galloping with your horse through them, so this is going to let you reach destinations quicker. You can also set grass on fire and affect multiple targets at the same time. It's especially useful if you lure them into one tight spot and then set that on fire, or use an explosive against multiple of them in case you want to deal with a large group in one single blow. And that pretty much concludes today's video. If you ended up enjoying it or find it useful, a sub to the channel would help me a lot. Also, make sure to activate that notification bell if you want to get these videos out early. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.